We are deeply influenced by things that we don't necessarily notice.
From the visual images, this is someone who really gets along with the people around her.
This is a fascinating ad that got a lot of attention from social psychologists.
She seems to nail all the quadrants of likability. This is the War to Win Minds,
a limited series about how the political battle is really won and lost inside our brain.
I'm Matt Robison, writer, podcaster, and former campaign manager.
And I'm Lauren Goldstein, a psychologist and pollster for change research.
This is Episode 2, and today, what we like and what political campaigns can do to take advantage of it.
About 25 years ago, I saw the perfect explanation of how people form opinions. It was a political cartoon. For the life of me, I can't find it. It was published around the year 2000 as the presidential campaign was getting into full swing. It was very simple, just 4 panels. And in each one, it showed the same man speaking to you, the reader. In the first one, he says, I like George W. Bush because his father was president. In the second one, he says, I liked George Bush Sr. because he was Ronald Reagan's vice president. In the third, he says, I liked Ronald Reagan because he was in movies. And in the final one, he simply says, I like movies. If I asked you right now, why do you like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or Donald Trump for that matter? You might say, I like their position on immigration or social equality or crime. That might be true. You might genuinely like and appreciate those things. But how did you start liking that politician? Was it because you Googled their policy positions, or were there associations that set the table for your mind? The reality is, for all of us, our opinions come from other places than the parts of our brain that make rational judgments. If I told you about a new brand of ice cream and I wanted to convince you to try it, should I give you the list of ingredients or show you a picture that reminds you of getting 2 scoops on a warm summer day when you were a kid? In our first episode, we covered the difference between the central root of persuasion and the peripheral root, between facts and emotions, between reading someone the ice cream ingredients and showing someone savoring a bite of rocky road. Today, we want to break down one of the most well-studied principles of persuasion, taking advantage of what people already like. And what you'll see is that your favorite political leaders are using this idea in the 2024 campaign right now. Once you see it, you'll never unsee it. So let's bring in Lauren. All right. So do you like how I went full on meta in that introduction when it comes to persuasion principles? Actually, Dr. Lauren Goldstein, I would like you to give me a grade, much like you used to grade your undergrads. How did I do? I opened with storytelling, key persuasion principle. I ended by saying that people's favorite political leaders are using the liking principle. So I used the liking principle. How did I do?
I think you did great. You also used metaphors, another key one. I'm gonna give you an A today.
So look, on the surface, today's topic has kind of a duh quality to it, right? Like, people are more likely to be persuaded by people and associations they like. That makes sense, but you're making a deeper point about psychology, which is why you wanted to cover this principle. What is it?
I would say, big point of the episode here, reminding folks of something that I was attempting to myth bust in episode 1 and that I promised I would keep bringing up. We all fancy ourselves incredibly independent thinkers, rational information consumers. We are evaluating evidence. We are making thoughtful, careful decisions all of the time. That is simply not how we operate as human beings. And we are deeply influenced by things that we don't necessarily notice or credit.
And of course, when it comes to the well duh aspect of this, it's one thing to say, people are more likely to be persuaded by people that they like. And if you're running a campaign, you can go searching for such people, or you can try to engineer it. And let me pause. My 8-year-old just walked in. So we're having a real BBC moment here. I'm going to start that again.
I'm gonna say leave it in.
Did I
Made me like you.
did I successfully mute there? Because I'm not sure that my dad tone was, I don't know if my body language conveyed that I was kind of being a loving dad or a stern dad.
You know, it's incredible. I think that the mute combined with the body language just hit the likability principle full in the face because you looked really nice, but I don't know what you said.
All right. I don't even know what I was saying there. What I was saying is, what you could do if you're trying to run a political campaign is you can search for people who are naturally likable or who have organic moments with their 8-year-old, or you can try and engineer it. And usually you just have to deal with the hand you're dealt, and the hand you're dealt is the candidate you've got, and you've got to try to engineer more likability. So what do we know about how to do that?
We know a lot, and we don't have time to cover all of it today, but there are basically several ways that the liking principle manifests, and I want to talk us through four of them. Those four are going to be similarity, complements, attractiveness, and association.
Let's talk about attractiveness first. I assume that's why we were chosen to host this show.
Chosen by
A,
ourselves. That's
a
absolutely.
battle of two. Yes, we're it turns out we have 100% approval rating on attractiveness from a panel of ourselves. This is not something that you can engineer. I mean, unless you like do a lot of hairstyling, which I do.
Yeah, I mean, we all have ways that we can kind of help ourselves out in this department, right? But essentially, research shows that people tend to attribute more positive qualities to attractive people, and that sort of by extension, they're more likely to comply with their requests as a consequence. So, this is called the halo effect. What it basically means is that when you see a person as attractive, you're more likely to ascribe other positive traits to them in addition, things like intelligence, kindness, competence, success. A really classic example of this is the Kennedy Nixon debate in 1960. This is the first debate, presidential debate, where TV actually plays a role. So a chunk of voters listened to this on the radio, and a chunk of them watched it on TV. The people who watched it on TV largely perceived Kennedy as the winner. He looked really confident. He looked calm. He's well groomed. He's tan. He's attractive. And by comparison, Richard Nixon, poor guy, looks pale. He looks sweaty. He's sort of visibly uncomfortable. So the TV audience is pretty heavily focused on what these candidates look like and their body language. And that really influenced their perception of their competence and their leadership abilities, which is what they're really being graded on. So the TV audience is really heavily focused on what these candidates look like. The folks who listened to this on the radio and who didn't have any of those visual cues tended to perceive Nixon as the winner.
There's kind of a dark side to there's a dark side to a lot of persuasion principles, right? I mean, we should say this up front. My mentor in grad school used to describe them as scary effective. And then he would show us propaganda films from Nazi Germany to show how well applied persuasion principles can be scary effective with an emphasis on the scary part. They can also be scary effective in a wonderful way. And the liking principle is one of these psychology ideas that can have a bit of a double-edged sword.
Absolutely. Physical attractiveness principle, the halo effect, is absolutely a double edged sword for women in particular. So, a lot of research has shown, for example, attractive women may be viewed as less competent. So, their achievements might be attributed to being beautiful rather than to skill or intelligence or effort. There can be a penalty for beauty. They may be perceived as less serious, less capable, especially if they're seeking a leadership role. The attractiveness aspect of getting people to like you is a minefield for women. It's an exceptionally delicate balancing act. You sort of have to be the right amount of attractive. This is essentially the essence of the Barbie monologue of the ways in which being a woman is just in some ways functionally impossible.
You're supposed to stay pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much or that you threaten other women because you're supposed to be a part of the sisterhood.
And I will point out that all physical attributes are kind of part of this double-edged sword. If you want to do a fun Google, just look up the average height of US presidents throughout history. Obviously, they've all been men thus far, but we're a heightist people. We are a heightist society. We tend to see more authority and more leadership qualities in people who are taller, which obviously does become a double whammy for shorter women, especially. But obviously, all of this is super relevant in 2024 when we've got a taller man up against a woman. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about your second category, similarity. We tend to like people who are similar to us in terms of interests, background, or values, or even the way they look. And this one's also a little bit of a double-edged sword, true?
Absolutely. This has functioned as a negative against women and against people of color. So if you think about that trope of voters wanting a candidate they can envision themselves having a beer with, the prototype of that persona is a man and it's a white man. How often have we ever heard that people say that about a woman? First of all, like I myself would love to have a beer with Elizabeth Warren, but I don't think I'm the median voter here. Is that how you've ever heard a woman described?
I will tell you that backstage, Elizabeth Warren, I mean, you probably know this, but
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren is so relaxed and relatable. Like, she's delightful when she's not on stage. She does come across like a Harvard professor when she's on stage, but I would love to have a beer with Elizabeth Warren.
I mean, me too, but I don't think that we are We're not the people in need of persuading on this principle,
Right.
right? That similarity principle for candidates of color can sometimes be like tantamount to trying to push a boulder uphill.
People default to very surface things. And so, one of the challenges, especially for candidates of color, is to say, hey, what makes us similar isn't necessarily, skin tone. It's other deeper things. And we're actually exactly the same in a lot of the ways that really, really matter. The master of this is Barack Obama. I just wrote about this in Newsweek, this exact point, and you wanted to take a look at an ad of his from 2008, which is all about sending this message of, hey, we are very, very similar. Let's take a look.
I'm Barack Obama. America is a country of strong families and strong values. My life's been blessed by both. I was raised by a single mom and my grandparents. We didn't have much money, but they taught me values straight from the Kansas heartland where they grew up. Accountability and self-reliance, love of country, working hard without making excuses, treating your neighbor as you'd like to be treated. It's what guided me as I worked my way up, taking jobs and loans to make it through college. It's what led me to pass up Wall Street jobs and go to Chicago instead, helping neighborhoods devastated when steel plants closed. That's why I passed laws moving people from welfare to work, cut taxes for working families, extended health care for wounded troops who'd been neglected. I approved this message because I'll never forget those values. And if I have the honor of taking the oath of office as president, it will be with a deep and abiding faith in the country I love.
It's all right there. Right? Just looking at the visual, you're just seeing all of these associations that essentially say, I'm pretty familiar. My story is the same as probably a lot of your stories.
Absolutely. I mean, invoking the heartland, Kansas specifically, the imagery of his white family members. And to your point, even a piece of the little nugget of policy that's in this ad is still very much values coded. It's about patriotism, it's about veterans. Everything about this ad is saying, I am like you.
Let's do one more ad. Again, we want to talk about a political leader who happens to be African American and talking about how we overcome the similarity hurdle. So let's take a look at Raphael Warnock.
Is it just me? Or does it feel like we've been here before? The whole country's finished voting, and only us left. You'd think Herschel Walker would want to explain what he'd do in the Senate if he actually wants to represent Georgia. Instead, he repeats the same lies, trying to distract from what we all know is true about him. But I think Georgians will see his ads for what they are. Don't you? I'm Raphael Warnock, and yes, we're doing this again. That's why I approve this message.
All right. So you want to talk about the text or the subtext?
Yeah, right. And this is a fascinating ad that got a lot of attention from social psychologists who study race and racial identity and its influence on politics, because this is, again, like somewhat white coded, right? It's suburban imagery, walking your dog. I love the little peripheral cue of throwing out the bag of dog poo, right? As he's sort of talking about where Herschel Walker needs to be relegated in our political sphere. But all of the imagery here is really, really white suburbia oriented.
I think that captures the whole thing. A picture's worth 1,000 words. And in this case, watching it on mute was more valuable to me than watching it with what he's saying, because the whole message is in the visuals. All right, let's go to our next kind of sub principle of liking. Let's talk about compliments.
Not too hard to figure out here, right? Compliments, positive feedback make people feel good. You're more inclined to like a person that's giving you compliments. I'll make the ultimate millennial reference here, but like think about Andy in The Office, right? Just a complete yes man who's trying to ride the strategy of compliments with his boss, Michael, in order to ingratiate himself and sort of rise professionally. Compliments are not a new concept, but they operate in a political setting to try to get people to like the candidate that is complimenting them.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you were saying there because I'm a Gen Xer. I want to clarify that I am not a boomer like my kids tend to accuse me of. I'm a Gen Xer. But yeah, this is one of those that goes back to the idea of it can be scarily effective. I referred to Robert Cialdini and his book Influence in episode 1, which is a classic in persuasion psychology. And he tells this story about a car salesman named Joe Girard. And Joe's trick, which has made him one of the biggest car salesmen in the country, is he sends a postcard every month to his 13,000 former customers. And it has one simple phrase written on the inside. And just that phrase, I like you. That's all it is. He just reminds all of these folks every month that he likes them. And we can get into other principles that plays on, reciprocity, etc. But it is amazing how paying compliments to your audience kind of makes you more likable. The ultimate version of this, by the way, comes from one of my favorite movies. I actually did a whole episode on Beyond Politics with the writer and executive producer of this movie. It's the Eddie Murphy film, The Distinguished Gentleman from 1992. I used to use this clip, this speech that you're about to see from Eddie Murphy to tell candidates who I was managing, this is how you give the basic political speech. And the setup here is that the congressman and the congressional candidate, played by Eddie Murphy, has to suddenly address a group of poultry growers, poultry farmers, and he doesn't really know what to say. It's kind of sprung on him. So this is what he does.
I have a confession to make. I don't know very much about poultry, but I do know people. And I like you people. I really do. And if you people come to me and you say to me that you have something to say important about poultry, I'm going to listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right. Let's talk about association. This is kind of what I was getting at in my intro there, the story about I like movies. Associations can be incredibly powerful.
Definitely. So there's a custard shop in my city that has a framed photo on the wall of Barack Obama visiting the shop. Every friend or family member that I've taken there for custard has noticed the photo and immediately gotten more excited to taste the dessert. Like Barack Obama ate here. And I can pretty much guarantee that any store with a framed photograph of Donald Trump patronizing it would instantly make me turn around and leave. I'm not going to spend money on that business. That is how we operate. Again, like we might fancy ourselves incredibly rational beings. It might be an incredibly popular place. They might have incredible reviews. The product might be very high quality. But if my enemy likes it, I'm out. I don't want it.
It's also an incredible shortcut into people's brains. Again, this is relying on Daniel Kahneman and heuristics and these little tricks that we use to substitute for doing a lot of thinking. This is incredibly important for reaching the kinds of voters that are at stake in 2024 that are probably going to tilt the election one way or the other. The people who are not only undecided, not only tuned out, but actively turned off. They're trying to avoid information about politics. So how do you get through to those people? The way the Trump campaign is doing it is by making use of non-traditional communications platforms like Twitch. They're doing a lot of shows with gamer bros. And the way that Democrats have frequently been able to do it is we have a lot of celebrities on our side, and we make use of people who are not associated with politics, and we bring them in to endorse. And that's a quick way to shortcut your way into someone's brain who's trying not to listen to a lot of politics stuff.
Absolutely. A fun example that comes to mind is Steph Curry and his entire family endorsing Biden in 2020 during the DNC.
This election,
we're voting for Joe Biden. Let's have a conversation with these kids.
let's do it. So, let's jump right in, shall we?
What does jump in mean?
Go for it.
Mommy, I can't be quiet.
Why?
Okay.
I don't want you to be quiet. You deserve to speak and say whatever it is that comes to your mind in this moment right now.
Excuse me, Mommy?
Yes.
I need to go to the bathroom.
Think about your own homes and what you'd like to see projected out into the world in the right direction is making sure that you vote this election for Biden. You gonna dance out?
They had that adorable video that is just incredibly relatable. It's cute. It's fun. This is a professional athlete. They're not political figures, but they are well known and they are by many people beloved. And it was sweet. It was relatable, and it established this really cute, positive association.
All right. Why don't we put it all together and take a look at another current cycle ad? And this is Kamala Harris's. We looked last week in our first episode at her intro video. But what we're about to see here is an ad called Fearless, which is the ad that she's actually putting money behind on TV. It's a 1-minute ad. And let's see, you can play along at home. Let's see how many of these liking principles we can spot.
One thing Kamala Harris has always been: fearless. As a prosecutor, she put murderers and abusers behind bars. As California's Attorney General, she went after the big banks and won $20 billion for homeowners. And as vice president, she took on the big drug companies to cap the cost of insulin for seniors. Because Kamala Harris has always known who she represents.
This campaign is about who we fight for. We believe in a future where every person has the opportunity not just to get by, but to get ahead, where every senior can retire with dignity. But Donald Trump wants to take our country backward, to give tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations and end the Affordable Care Act. But we are not going back. I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
I'm sure people are thinking about it as they go, but what jumps out to you when it comes to liking?
I mean, there's a lot to like here. She's showcasing herself with kids. That's incredibly relatable and also just incredibly likable, warm. That you see imagery of her hugging somebody. We don't see that with Trump because I'm not sure the man has ever given or received a hug in his life. Those are a couple things that jump out to me. What do you see?
First of all, I think if someone had hugged Donald Trump a little earlier in life, we might be in a very
We
different.
might not be here.
Right, exactly. Hugs, lot of hugs. At about the 20-second mark, you see her speaking, she's coming in for a hug, speaking with a kid, speaking, hard hats, and then it's going to be coming in for another hug. Another one that really jumped out to me, if you ever look back at clips of Bill Clinton was the master of this. At about the 40-second mark, right there it is. You see the two-handed handshake. There's a lot of physical warmth. You see her on screen relating to other people and both liking them and being liked. And the images, this is another example of an ad where watching with the sound off really does a lot. In fact, sometimes, I don't know if you in focus groups, do you ever do the thing where you make people watch the ad with the sound off?
I
We
don't
used
think
to
I
do this
have.
in campaigns. Yeah, we used to do this in campaigns sometimes. We would just, ask people like, what do you get from this? And for the visual images, you see like kids looking up at her with rapturous attention. This is someone who really gets along with the people around her.
Absolutely. Incredibly likable.
All right. So that's the ad. You see the associations, you see the similarity in terms of her physical look. She is physically attractive, but she doesn't look like a supermodel who looks like, an alien from Mars. You know how supermodels kind of have that, they're beautiful, but in a kind of like, I'm a little afraid of you kind of way. That's not what they're going for here with Kamala Harris. The area that you can't get in an ad like that is compliments, but you sort of get it on screen. That's what all the hugging is about, right? It's a way of saying, I like you, and it's reciprocated back. And so she seems to nail all the quadrants of likability.
While, having all the odds kind of stacked against her, right? Because at baseline, she is a woman of color, and she's very attractive. She has to figure out how to navigate all of those pieces.
In your findings, in your work with change research, what do you have that kind of backs up both the liking principle and how it's playing out in this campaign?
One of the things that we as pollsters are always doing at Change is looking for trusted messengers. So that includes, but isn't limited to, like news sources that people trust. We're taking the temperature on that, trying to understand where they're getting their information, but we're also taking the temperature on public figures, whether that's celebrities like actors and athletes that are potential endorsers of a candidate, also just local figures in their communities. So at Change, we're always looking for creative ways to measure and to understand not just what people want to hear from their candidates, but from whom they might want to hear about the policies and the ideas, and whose endorsement, whose support would be a meaningful signifier to them that this candidate would fight for them, would champion them. Another way that we are assessing likability is by trying to understand whether folks perceive similarity between themselves and the candidates. So we're getting at that by providing a bunch of traits or descriptors in our research and asking people, how well does that describe the candidate or the party? Or whether they would describe one candidate or party better than the other, those labels, those descriptors. And that's going well beyond things that we've seen in polling. We're asking them to go deeper than that and rate statements like, cares about people like me, and shares my values. So, a lot of what we're measuring at Change Research when we do this work is a subtle exploration of these liking principles.
Let's bring this home. We've looked at 4 aspects of likability in this episode. We've talked about similarity, we've talked about compliments, we've talked about attractiveness, we've talked about association. I want to do a little bit of a preview of our next episode because Donald Trump has none of those things going for him. And so what we want to cover next time is, what do you do if you've got a candidate who isn't likable? And one thing we know about Donald Trump is he is one of the most unliked major political figures in American history, perhaps the most unliked. So what you see coming out of the Trump campaign in their ads is something very, very different than the ad we just watched for Kamala Harris. But I think her ad and everything you've described here really captures how you can harness the liking principle to make your candidate more persuasive and move some votes. Thanks for running through all of this, Lauren. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Excited to get to social proof next week.